Hey, everybody, and welcome to another thrilling edition of the Boston New Technology Fireside Fridays Fireside Chat series. I have with me two amazing people, two people who I consider to be really good friends in the ecosystem. We're going to have a lot of fun today. So I'm joined by my compatriot at Born Global Boston and the Born Global community in partnership with Boston New Technology, also named Steve Hahn. He's going to be my co-host for today's session, and we're also joined by the amazing Chareeda Rustanavibul. So Chareeda is going to be telling us all about her truly amazing journey here in the Boston startup ecosystem, and really beyond that too, like stretching into places all over the United States, and how she is seeing the startup ecosystem grow and thrive, and what she's up to, and what really she's passionate about. So, without further ado, I'll first hand it off to Steve in case he has a few other words he wants to say, and then we'll go over to Chareeda and we'll get underway. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this opportunity. I'm excited to meet Chareeda here, and I think we're gonna have a great conversation here. Yeah, let's. I think we can just get started.
Sure, Chareeda, why don't you kick us off with an intro and sort of what you want to get out of today's conversation? Any like messages to the audience as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Steve and Steve, for having me out here at Boston Technology. I'm super excited to be a part of this. For everyone, intro as well, my name is Chareeda Rustanavibul, and I'm a vice president at Silicon Valley Bank. So in my day job, I help support early stage tech founders, startups all across New England. And I help support them with free banking and also value beyond banking. And when I say that, it really means the community aspect of it. So ways that I can lean in through our very curated types of events, community building activities with investors and founders, and also just hearing what founders need in the ecosystem and curating events to that and resources. So that's what I do in my day job. I would say that outside of my day job, I also help run a nonprofit called NAP. It's National Association of Asian American Professionals. I was actually their chief convention director. So I hosted a national leadership convention here in Boston, bringing in 800 Asian American, Pacific Islander professionals here to Boston to really learn from the next generation of leaders and industry leaders as well. And so that would be my second thing that I do with NAP. And then my third thing is I'm also a community fellow at Gold House, which is another nonprofit where I help manage a community of over 500 plus Asian and Pacific Islander founders all across the U.S. So I'd say the key themes would be community and certainly being able to connect people throughout the dots.
Yeah, I would definitely, affirm that. And for as long as I've known you, Sharita, you've really set the standard for me in terms of like community building, value beyond services that companies are offering. So I'd like to kick us off here. I want to sort of frame this as, can you share a pivotal moment when community building significantly like impacted the trajectory of like what it is that you're trying to do here? Like, what was like one magic moment maybe you want to talk about first when it comes to all of your efforts?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this goes really hand in hand in terms of understanding why I'm passionate about the work that we do and why everything all relates to each other. So I would say one magic moment would be when I first started at SUV, and I've actually been here for almost 3 years. It's a little over 2.5 years. I think that I didn't know anyone in the tech ecosystem at all or in startups. And when I started getting more connected to it, I started to really understand, okay, there are certain like key super connectors that can really make a difference and help shape even my personal trajectory being involved in the startup ecosystem. So why I mentioned that is because it really just takes one person to make a world of difference, depending on who they intro you to. And I remember specifically for me, I got connected to, not just one person, but multiple people who were like, you need to connect with X, Y, and Z, this person, this person. And then the more that I was able to do that, the more I felt I was able to get connected to the right resources, the right connectivities, and then be able to help founders that I'm able to lean in further here at SVB. And so when we started putting a lot of our events, it was like first after COVID, when a lot of the in-person events were happening at SVB, we hosted a couple of founders and funders events. And I remember I just invited several founders to these events, and I was like just talking to them over Zoom. And I said, hey, like I heard you're fundraising. You should come to this event. We're hosting this X, Y, Z. And this particular founder told me afterwards, oh, Chareeda, I'm very, very thankful I came to this event. I actually met my angel investor and one of our lead investors from coming to that event. And I think it's like those pivotal moments that really make me think about, why do we do what we do? How can we be more intentional about it and actually get people connected to those serendipitous nodes of connectivity? And I think that that's definitely helped shape at least my perspective and hopefully the trajectory of some of these startups too.
Sure. And after so after hearing that, I smiled because honestly, it anticipates another question I'll ask later. But before I put it over to Steve, for Steve Squared here today, so the other Steve, I just want to say that from where I've been standing and seeing things, you talked about how there were a few super connectors that helped get you connected. I now feel, just as a statement I'd like to make, that you've become one of those people as well. And I think we see that pretty much every day because all the activities that you do, they're always very purpose driven. So, yeah, Steve, after you.
Yeah, yeah. Oh no, it was great. It was great to hear that side. I personally am kind of in the earlier phase of that journey myself as well, getting connected with all kinds of great people, Steve included. Now you, Chareeda, as well. So yeah, I definitely understand the value of these serendipitous connections that you're talking about. Maybe question from me is kind of the first question here is you mentioned a couple platforms on which you're kind of building your communities already. I wonder if you would share any light on any new exciting opportunities coming on that you're kind of interested in exploring.
Yeah, absolutely. So new opportunities within like different types of like platforms or different.
Yeah, or different community. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I one thing that I've definitely identified is that when you want to build a really successful community, you have to really think about what is the purpose behind this community. What are the things that they actually have in common with one another? And I also am a big fan of, if you get too broad, then it almost dilutes the community or dilutes the ability for everyone to really get the most or optimize on their experience of being a part of this.
Yeah.
So some of the experiences I've been thinking about and still in the works is I definitely want to have more sector specific type of communities. So consumer, I actually think we did a consumer tech breakfast with Boston New Technology as well. And that event was just one event that happened in May. And so many people have come up to me afterwards, even today sometimes. Like I was at an event 2 weeks ago, somebody mentioned it. And it just goes to show that like that event was very curated and very specific to the consumer founder community and also the investor community, that when those types of curated events happen, it sticks with people. And I think that as I reflect on these new experiences, I really want to be thoughtful about what sort of communities are missing from here in Boston. So consumer is definitely not super known here in the Boston market. I would say, you hear a lot of the same sectors over and over again. In consumer, people think of New York or even like just not anywhere here in Boston.
Yeah.
And so I would love to be able to curate more of those types of communities where I identify there being a gap here. In addition to that, more diverse communities as well. Here in Boston, we have the best universities, the best talent, and then everybody leaves. And so I think there's got to be a way to just create more of that community and provide them with the right resources here. So I would say those would be my top two types of experiences I'd like to focus on.
Amazing. Yeah. So that consumer, that was really a watershed moment, I think, for both of our organizations. Because for Boston New Technology, I mean, really, since our inception, like well over 12 years ago at this point, like in startup years, we're like 1,000 years old. And with that comes the unique challenge of wanting to also stay new, be like new technology, literally. So with that mindset, we worked with you, Chareeda, obviously, to create something that was super intentional, and that is apparently still going on in people's minds. We're going to be doing more things with consumer founders as well. Would love to collaborate with you on that. And you mentioned diversity too, and I think diversity is one of those terms that, to your point, can also be a little bit too broad in the understanding. So I'm gonna go a little bit more granular with you. Where do you think there is a bit of lacking in that like diversity. Like, what kinds of communities do you think we should be looking to stand up more, and how does that take place from the perspective of like the ecosystem support organizations? In the way that it's like you're not doing too much, like you're letting everybody have autonomy, but you're being very cooperative and helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, so I've been thinking about this very, very intentionally as well. And I think that there are lots of little hubs of connectivity. So there's within D&I, right? So I'm very, very involved with specifically the Asian entrepreneurship community. And then I'm very aware of the Latinx, the Black community, and especially the resources that they have there. But one thing that I do think could be helpful is, especially here in Boston, more or less like an alliance among those communities. I think that could be something that could really shape the trajectory of Boston. Is everybody's kind of doing there's almost like a, we don't want to be too broad, but we also being too narrow sometimes actually doesn't allow for us to advance further. It's almost like, how can we create almost like a unifying effect of everybody's doing their own thing, but occasionally we need to find maybe centers of connectivities where we can all work together, because we're all doing the same thing for the same purpose, and that's to increase access to capital, access to the barriers of entry into entrepreneurship, and etc. And how can we do that more collectively? And I think that that could be something where if we are able to get these different groups, and I'm sure there are many other groups that I might not even be aware of, and they're doing impactful work as well. But let's uplift them and let's bring everyone together and see what we could do and achieve collectively. So if I had to change that, I would say that if we could, maybe there's like an alliance of everybody that's doing all the different groups coming together. Maybe it's a council that we can actually start to drive this change going forward.
So Steve and I, Steve Squared, Steve Squared regularly gets together and talks about this like all the time. We're so big about not only communities but the coalition building, the connectivity, like because you can have so many communities, you can have like a plethora of communities, but if they're not connected, even in small ways that are beneficial, it's like they're like islands, but they're not island chains. So, Steve, I'm going to put it over to you, but I wonder what you think about. I know you probably have a question, but I would also love to hear you engage with Chareeda a little bit about what she just said, because I know it's a passion thing for us as well.
Yeah. I think there's a huge amount of overlap between what you said and kind of what I've been deeply engaged in these days. A lot of what I'm personally working on is really look at people who are not even in the community. So yesterday, I was working with a couple of people from BU in the program called Dream Venture Labs. It was created to support refugee and immigrant founders uh, in the Boston area first, and then globally in US is kind of where they're trying to scale to. And it became very clear that there are problems that are interesting to VCs and bankers traditionally that we think of as innovation, but then there's this whole world of just like people that need help and assistance, and yes, they don't have the resources that is interesting for a VC, right? Even if they give everything they have, they can't pay as much as what a VC would like as kind of return on top. So like there's a big question of like how do we create a system to support the kind of objectively less profitable sectors of um, just existing as human, I would say, for the less wealthy people. And I think that's a very big question that would involve players in the ecosystem, from entrepreneurs at the very bottom to like funding sources at the very top. Because if at the end of the day, if we only care about kind of growing capital, then we naturally would say those people don't matter. But that's not the reality we really want to create here. So the question for me for the past few years here building Think Divergent is there a way for us to, like you said, lower the barriers for people in those communities to naturally bring others around them together in a way that's as capital efficient as possible, so that instead of saying, you know what, we're going to find some money to go into those communities and solve their problems, instead, let's say, let's help people within those communities rise up and uh, address their own issues and give them access to all of the tools, the capital, the culture, the technology that they need. So I think this approach is probably long term going to be more viable in terms of like facilitating diversity, because it's not really saying that every company needs to have XYZ to be considered diverse, but rather it's whichever background you come from, we want to help you help your people. And if everyone have access to that, then you kind of can achieve diversity through a higher level.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right spot on in terms of like being able to provide the resources as well. And I also love how you just commented out, like, it's not just about capital, right? Like, first of all, not every startup needs to go into VC. That's also a hot take that I think I'm very proud to share and just like let people know. Like, if you have a thriving business, you don't need to dilute your equity. But that's all to say, to bring us all back, I would say that to your point about resources, another thing that I think could be really prominent is when we think about even some of the events that are happening out here in the Boston startup ecosystem. It's great because it also brings everyone together. And I think that's something that we do need to keep on doing. But I think one thing that I'd like to challenge our Boston startup community on just a little bit more would be, how can we bring more resources from maybe out of Boston into Boston? So basically when we think about like VCs, we think about the super successful serial entrepreneurs. Where are they based out of? Or where are they typically roping at? So I'm thinking, if we could bring more very successful entrepreneurs from out of state, unicorn founders, and the very high level like VCs out there to Boston. Let's get them on a panel. Let's get them on like more connected to the Boston startup ecosystem and show them the work that we are doing here. I think that could also help just create that access as well. So that's something that I've also been thinking pretty hard about, and especially those firms that are also doing the work in this space, in the DEI space. I'm thinking like the very curated, like, hey, we are specifically just investing in underrepresented founders. How can we bring more of those guys here to Boston as well? So there's just some things to think about too.
Yeah, I mean, I think both of you really provided a lot of key insights, into how we can continue to do the work that we do. As I mean, I really see myself as a servant of the early stage community, and really of the startup community in general, because of the amount of hospitality, the amount of love that I was shown when I was just beginning my journey, first as a co-founder, then as a founder. But before I let this escape me, Chareeda, you said something really, really, really nice, which was that startups often are pressured unintentionally to think that in order to be a proper startup, you need to be VC backable, or you need to be investable from that side of the aisle. And it's just simply not true. I would add to that really, if you think about it, the more non-diluted you are, the more attractive you are. Like, for example, we often encourage startups at Boston New Technology to pursue grants, to pursue, access to other forms of capital that will not be taking equity from them, so that if in fact they ever do want to go down that route, by the time their cap tables get opened, they're pretty clean and they look, looks a lot clearer, to the investors there. But my question is, based off of the last thing you said, which was how we should be bringing other people from other ecosystems in, I was highly impressed by what you were able to do with Andrew Young the other day, like with that event. And I think that's a really good example of doing something very, I might use a somewhat cheesy term, mavericky, something very outside, the conventional way of doing things. Can you walk us through like how that? Well, first of all, tell us how it went, but also like when you were planning that and doing that, like was that part of your overall like thinking around trying to do things differently for the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think that when I was, well, honestly, one of the key things is I actually met Andrew in New York. And so I like stepped out of our ecosystem to go to New York and try to see who else is out there in New York. And that was how I initially got connected to Andrew. And I think that that's just like one example, right? Andrew has done such incredible work in all of these different cities as well. He has an incredible network. And it was just really, really amazing to see him. One, I think it was his first time here in Boston. So it was great to see him to come to Boston and then put on this Boston Tech Social with us at SVB as well, and really just bring more of the community together. And I think that that's just one example, but I even want to go like further from that. So it's not just like the happy hours networking, but like even subject matter experts that could come in and talk through some of the incredible things that they're building. So I would say a good combination of both.
Yeah, because we go back to Steve Hahn, like I think that's the perfect recipe because ultimately founders work very hard and they do deserve to, at the end of the day, for example, or even when they're beginning their day, because I know you and I are a big fan of breakfast events too. So there do need to be there does need to be rather a balance, I think, of both, information, entertainment, and like again, connection to things that founders are looking for. And yeah, I'll go over to Steve in a second here, but I just wanted to thank you for kind of pushing back on that a little bit because I think, and you've been saying this a lot too, it's been the tendency in the industry for years to be like, let's just give the people what we think they want, but really what we thought that they wanted is often not the case because if you ask a lot of founders, they'll probably say, I like to network, but you know what I also need? I need tangible assistance in like A, B, C, X, X, Y, Z. Yeah, over to you, Steve.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's it's like what we said before. There are multiple different ways that we could help folks in the ecosystem, and it's never only they only need capital or they only need assistance or they only need networks. So it's a kind of holistic approach that I think will be more effective here. Yeah. So, well, back to our track, I guess. So you mentioned earlier your role in the kind of like NAP Boston chapter. Because being Asian myself, I'm kind of curious about how what was the journey there like, and how you kind of managed to grow the organization kind of under your leadership there. Because I myself, I'm the community lead at Born Global, which is a Houston-based nonprofit that is supporting immigrant founders. And naturally, we kind of have the same challenges. I would imagine we're much earlier in the phase, in the stage. So yeah, I'm curious to hear kind of your thought, your experience, and kind of like what were the things that you did that really accelerated and led to the success today. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I honestly found Nap Boston because in a similar vein, when I first moved to Boston, I was looking for a community to join. And I think that I literally found Nap Boston through a Google search, found one of their events, and then from there was just sold by just how close knit the community was. And so NAP is a nonprofit which is focused specifically on advancing Asian and Asian American professionals. And we do this through community building and also career development, professional development activities. And so there's lots of different, to our earlier conversation about, the networking, the community building, and then the resourceful type of events. There's like a really good combination of both. And so when I first joined, I really just volunteered, wanted to get involved and understand how I could learn more about this community and identify and really like find mentors in this as well. And so I joined, and then quickly there were like leadership positions that had opened up. So I ended up leading their women's committee, which is really focused on advancing API women all across Boston. And this was actually during COVID, so it was completely virtual. I almost felt like, in a way, it was like my own little startup because they had this committee. It went away, and then I was like back at it, just trying to grow it back. And so I had to really come up with, what was my mission in doing this? How can I get the word out, market some of these events? And I think the first event that we ever had was actually microaggressions in the workplace. And so I had no idea what I was doing at first. I was like, I feel like this is a topic that I want to talk about, and I want to hear other people's experiences about it. So I set up this virtual event, put it out on Eventbrite, and just like hoped for the best and tried to share it with a couple of our friends. And 40 women actually showed up to it. And it was in the midst of COVID. And I was like, wow, there are other people that actually have gone through similar experiences like me. And being able to create that safe space was something that I quickly realized this is what I wanted to do. And this is why I felt so passionate about the work that we did there. And that was just when I was a part of this committee. So over time, I was a part of that for about 2 years. And then I was kind of looking for, created this community, created this distribution list. We had new leadership that I was also working with, building up as well to ultimately take over the committee. And myself, I was looking for something that would challenge me a little bit more now that I've had that exposure. And so NAP Boston actually won the bid of NAP, so NAP is like a national organization with 30 chapters, NAP Boston being one of them. And we won the bid to host a convention here in Boston. And I was just completely ecstatic. I think one of the things that was mentioned when I found out was like, wow, this is a very, very challenging thing that I just don't even I can't even wrap my head around. What does a convention look like, having maybe over 700, 800 people come and then 3 days of full programming? It was something that I couldn't understand how to do, but that made me even want to do it more, where I was like, okay, I'm just going to raise my hand and see what happens. Like, I want to take this on. And so I would say that since I took on that role, it was about a year of just planning, growing out the team. Also felt like a startup. I had to identify, we actually had like rounds of interviews for leadership position, and then try to get people into the spots that they need to be to actively lead. And this is completely volunteer. So it was just being able to sell the vision of what I wanted to do, what I felt was purposeful for NAP. And that was to unify visionaries. And that was how I actually came up with the theme of what if we could just bring people from all over the US, industry leaders, to come to Boston and really bring this entire community together. Let's invite the students, let's invite the Boston community. And we actually reached out to community organizers within Boston, gave them a free ticket. We said, we just want you to be here. And what if we just did all of that and see what happens out of it? And I think that was the most meaningful thing that I've ever, it was the most challenging, it was the most meaningful, and it was the most fulfilling thing that I've ever done to date, where being able to see this community come together and feel inspired. And we brought Mayor Wu there as well. So we had the Boston part of it. It was just, it was really something that I felt super passionate about. And I would say that was the reason why I've been able to continue the work that I do at NAP, and then hopefully try to do that within the Boston startup community as well.
Chareeda, I think I can speak for both Steves here. That was really powerful. I'm sitting here just thinking about, how much you've been able to do. And I think, that story in particular really brings everything full circle. But I used to be a hard-nosed journalist, even though it was just for a community newspaper. So I'm going to ask you a little bit of a tough question. And then I would like you to ask both of us, a question each, and then we can wrap up. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds great.
A little spicy, right towards the end. So talk very positively. You know what I mean? We've talked very positively, very aspirationally, but I also know that you're one of the most honest people I know. You have a lot of integrity. What do you think are some of the challenges that we're facing right now as a startup ecosystem, and what do we have to do to overcome them? How can we better confront them to understand them? And then how do we better overcome them, in order to be better at what it is that we do in providing support?
Ooh, that's a good question, Steve.
No pressure. I'm just, I just call it a little spice. So
No, absolutely. This is great. I would say that, and I feel bad for, maybe saying the same thing but I think this rounds out our conversation nicely. But I would say one of the challenges of our Boston, actually, I'm going to say two challenges of our Boston startup ecosystem. So the first being that we, again, have the best community to build at. We've got the best universities, maybe more universities than anywhere at all. So we have the best talent here in our city. And I think that our city has a very community centric feel, even though it is a city. So that's all to say, Boston to me is the best place to build. But one thing that I do feel is a challenge for a community is one, everybody goes to school here and then everybody leaves. So I think that's a huge challenge of how can we keep people here? I see some of the best companies ever come out of here, and even if they've raised funding, they end up leaving. And I think that there's clearly something that is missing that we need to address that. Maybe it's more resources, maybe it's just more capital or accessibility for other sources of capital, if not from Boston, to come here to Boston. So I would say that that would be a challenge, and potential way to address that would be in a similar vein of like, how can we just increase accessibility to all of us here in Boston? And then the second thing that I would say is a challenge is definitely in the realm of specifically to this Boston startup ecosystem is just more underrepresented founders and funders. I think that that's something that we really need to do a good job of, like being able to find more people in these types of positions, find more resources to truly increase capital. Because I think that even if we do start this community of more underrepresented founders finding incredible businesses, like where are the funders, right? And so I think that that would be another challenge that we could address. And I would almost address it in the same vein of like, how can we get more folks here who are funders, who have the same mission and values, and be able to actively enact on change here in our community.
See, it was spicy, but it was enjoyable. I'm really glad at risk, right? A little bit of risk there. So, Steve, I want to give you a chance to respond to that, and then after that's done, Chareeda, this is the fun part of the fireside chat where you get to put both Steves on the hot seat, and ask us whatever you want.
Yeah, no, I'll keep it less spicy as it would. I think both points that you mentioned are completely valid there. I do wonder. I'll leave some of it to off camera, I would say, or once we stop recording. But I think indeed, like the Boston, we do have the best schools in some ways, and even when I was building I was building a consumer fintech app about 2 years ago. 2 years ago, and when we were doing the fundraising process, it was just very clear. We were kind of told by even investors in Boston, it's like, well, yeah, for what you guys are doing, you really shouldn't be here in Boston. So like, it's almost like the ecosystem has already uh, got to a stable equilibrium where everyone in it is kind of just understanding that, okay, yeah, if you're in biotech, great, you're come to Boston, but if you're doing consumer, go to New York, go to Florida, go to Silicon Valley. Like Boston's just not your place. That's kind of interesting how this is where we ended up. But yes, it's quite challenging in those ways.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, something that comes to mind is like I don't want to obviously mention them, but you know, it's a beverage brand. You and I both support it. I met them at the Soa Market, and then they ended up exactly doing that. What Steve's been saying, like they did a great job, like building here and getting a lot of attraction. Like they actually, supplied a lot of their delicious drinks at a lot of my events. But then, in order to attract funding, they had to go to New York. There was like no other choice. So, with that said, I want to put this now under your control. You can ask Steve Squared whatever you want, and we have to answer. I mean, put it out there. So,
Okay, I don't want to cop this out either, but I also am curious to get both of your perspectives on what challenges do you see Boston startup community facing at this point, or what do you feel is currently missing? And also, what are some ways that you think you could, what are some like potential solutions? Because I'm always asking founders the same question. So I would love to get both of your take on this too, of like, what do you think is missing? What do you think that we could be doing better? And that way I can also take some time to reflect.
I think you mapped it out really nicely earlier, where you said that, yeah, we have a great community with lots of different like hubs and people doing cool stuff and all of that, so many events, but there is still, I mean, to make it fancy, a state of like fragmentation, a state of like disconnectedness on some levels that is frankly very sad and discouraging. I think the solution is to have, like you said, maybe it's an alliance, maybe it's a coalition, maybe it's some kind of a neutral party where it's like we all get together, we share ideas, we share resources, we try to think about the collective good, the greater good of like all of the founders. I mean, I know that at its inception, like that's what Boston New Technology has wanted to do. By the way, that's what Startup Boston also does really, really well. Like serving as that force in a community where like, not funders, not founders, but supporting founders and doing a lot of like community based work. So, I mean, I think the solution is we all have to get on the same page, but we also have to think about this. It's not just for us, it's for everyone. And we should be building not only bigger tables, but also bringing people to the table to make sure that we can all enjoy together. And I'll pass it over to Steve. And also, your dog is amazing. I love your dog.
Yeah, I'm a guest here. I think biggest challenge from kind of what I saw over the past 2 years in the ecosystem is when we speak of Boston Innovation System, most of the time I would say what's in people's mind are really around like between MIT and Harvard, like literally Cambridge Innovation System. And then when you drive across the bridge to Boston, to some of the southern parts of Boston, it becomes very clear that when you talk to people who are trying to start their companies there, it's like it's a totally different ecosystem where it's not thought of as, even though it's literally Boston, that's literally Boston geographically, it doesn't feel like it's, you have access to the best talent, you have access to the capital and investment. So like it's actually very clear that like you have these two worlds of innovation, or even like you have these two worlds of Boston innovation or even Boston startup, and the experiences are quite different, and one of them is well understood and it's kind of more connected to the rest of them. But I think that the other one is kind of a reflection of the bigger challenges we have in probably our society as a whole, not necessarily just Boston, not necessarily just the US. It's this question of like, yes, once you go outside of Harvard, MIT, Oxford, Cambridge, like there are problems that average people have to live average lives that do not generate as much economic value, and how we as a community can support that, right? Because I think at the end of the day, bankers and VCs are actually in two different roles, where bankers have a little bit more room to say, like, what, this is, we are in this community and we are serving this community, and if this community disappears, then our business is also gone. Versus VCs, like, what, we can make more money in the middle of Dubai or something, right? Like you can switch. In some ways, banking is more tied to the community's welfare in the long run than VC is. So I think in that ways, perhaps when we think about innovation ecosystem, we might put a little bit too much emphasis on VC in some ways, especially when we think about innovation centers that are not world class, right? Um, and I think there's a big question that to be answered is like, okay, we understand what works for that top end of the market. Now, can we create a similar ecosystem, or can we create an equally viable system for people who are uh, working for the lower end of the market, but that touches a lot more people? And that's something I am personally very passionate at working at, and I'm pretty sure that's something that we will eventually need as a whole for our society. It's great to have these conversations going. I would
It
say.
is. Yeah. So, in true tradition of the fireside chat, Sharita, we're going to give you the last word, and here's how I like to structure it. We'd love to, have this also be an opportunity for you to let everybody who's listening know two things: what it is that you're working on right now that you'd like people to know about, and then I know that you demonstrated it throughout this call, like you want to inspire people and lift them up. So any like parting words of advice, encouragement, empowerment, and then we'll bring the conversation to a conclusion for today. So Steve can be with his amazing dogs, and I can go off and do my thing.
So that sounds great. Thank you so much. Well, I guess maybe this is this goes back into our theme overall. But and I think the reason why I've been super passionate about it is because I am actively trying to do something about this, and that is creating a community or an alliance within our Boston startup ecosystem that is very curated and focused on how can we support underrepresented founders and funders going forward. And this is like a Chareeda, this is a Chareeda side project. Still thinking about it, maybe a 3 a.m. idea. So I'm not going to announce all the details on
I
this yet,
love
but
those program ideas. That's great.
yeah, so I won't announce all the details on this right now, but maybe just a little snippet to everyone on the call who will be watching this later. And then I would say, in terms of parting words, just honestly, I would say that like finding your mentors and resources across the community is probably the most important thing right now. I think that we understand as someone that works in banking and have seen everything across the ecosystem come to the state. We understand that it's a tough market to be in right now. So even if it's tough, I just want everyone to honestly like utilize the resources and the support that you've been able to create here, and really lean on us. Lean on myself, lean on the people that you've met and talked to at all of these networking events. It's time for us to really just come together and acknowledge that we need to be in it together during this difficult time, and then find ways to really set ourselves up for the future. So I would say, yeah, community and connectivity and just staying together in this.
Aye, aye, Captain. Sign me up. Sounds good to me. That's amazing. So, yeah, thanks everybody once again for joining us for a very special edition of the Boston New Technology Fireside Chat series, where we were very privileged to be with two of our partners today, Born Global Boston, and then we also have Chareeda, who's the partner of everybody, basically trying to do amazing things here in the startup community. One of the kindest and most amazing souls you'll ever meet. So, thank you, Chareeda. Thank you, my fellow Steve. We'll catch up soon. And thanks again, everybody.
Thank you so much for having me.